In certain parts of the world, people with disabilities are still being killed at birth. Kashe, a mother in Kenya, had 20 healthy babies, but her 21st was born with his feet turned backwards and with a cleft palate. And surrounded by her friends, they looked at each other with an understanding, went out behind the house, dug a hole, put the baby inside, and Kashe told them to fill it with water. If babies with disabilities do survive, they are often mistreated, neglected, or abandoned. Hadija is 10 now, but at age 5 was found living in a home with no walls and no floor, just left there all day, every day, alone in the dirt, with no food and no clothing. Kenyans also underestimate what people with disabilities are capable of. When Cindy goes for a run in Kenya, she is stared at, gawked at. Now, Cindy was born without her left hand, but people are amazed by the fact that she can run. Now, I know Cindy pretty well. Cindy and Kashe's son-in-law started the organization Kupenda that helps kids like Hadija. Hadija's at a school now where she has friends, she has access to an education and medical attention, she's got food and clothing. Kupenda is serving Kenya's largest minority. In fact, the world's largest minority. About 1 in 8 people have some sort of disability. That's 950 million of us. And most in Kenya are getting mistreated. They have very few opportunities for anything at all. But Kupenda had a new idea to change that. Take some kids with disabilities and climb Kilimanjaro, the highest freestanding mountain in the world. Now, I've been volunteering off and on with Kupenda for the past 10 years, but this idea, I couldn't resist. You see, I've seen firsthand the power that big challenges can have on people and their communities. The nonprofit I work for, Waypoint Adventure, runs adventures for youth and adults with disabilities to show them what they're capable of. I see it every day, people walking away with this new sense of themselves, having discovered new strengths, abilities, self-confidence. You see, we learn when we step outside of our comfort zone, right? Maybe it's rock climbing or kayaking or backpacking, or maybe it's standing on stage in front of a live audience, wearing a Britney Spears microphone. But I've also seen how big challenges can break down the divides within our community. There was a young man named Andrew who came on a recent indoor rock climbing program. And as the guy in the group on the more severe end of the autism spectrum, and also totally blind, others in the group didn't really give Andrew much attention. He was considered an outsider. But after this rock climbing program, where he was shooting to the top of every wall while his friends were sitting on the ground, fearful and unwilling to try, there was a newfound respect for Andrew. The community's expectations of Andrew changed once they realized what he could do. So, take on the highest peak in Africa to prove to a community that gawks at a woman who can run with one hand? I couldn't pass it up. And neither could 3 teens who were offered the opportunity: Fumo, Hassan, and Marceline. And I'll tell you about the way I met these 3 the day before the climb. Fumo is 19, and he has an intellectual disability. He talks with a bit of a stutter. Unfortunately, Fumo has been called stupid his whole life. His father is out of the picture. But Fumo is insanely fast and athletic, and also extremely stylish. When I met Fumo, he was wearing this white tracksuit and his hat spun backwards, and we sat together on the bus on the way to the base of the mountain, and he showed me on his flip phone picture after picture after picture of his model poses. Hassan is 16, and he's deaf. And I had actually met Hassan about 4 years earlier. So when I saw him, I asked him, "Hey, do you remember me?" And he nodded and said that he did. And then he signed my name. I couldn't believe it. But Hassan cares like that. He's got this quiet, calm, thoughtful, sensitive soul. Doesn't like to be the center of attention. If you were to tease him or help him with his bag or something, he gets all bashful and shy, but smiles and allows it to happen. And then Merceline is 16, and she has cerebral palsy. Her CP affects her right side, so she can't really hold anything well in her right hand, and she walks with a bit of a wide swinging gait. But if you met Merceline, you would be meeting a teenage girl. Giggling, blushing, kind of scheming the whole time. Picture as much emotion as you can pack into a human being, right? This is Merceline. Loves the center of attention. But if something doesn't quite go her way, she gives you the glare, the teenage girl pout. But now think of someone as feisty as a teenage girl, but who's been born with a disability. Pretty self-conscious about it among her peers, and now has been given the opportunity to climb Africa's tallest mountain alongside 2 teenage boys and 10 Americans. Merceline was in her element, desperate to prove herself. Now, even with months of preparation and communication back and forth, having the kids try on all this donated clothing and everything, they still really had no idea what they were getting themselves into. When Merceline was asked, "What do you think you'll see up there?" she said, "Trees and houses. Lots of houses." But an accurate prediction that they all had was that it was going to be cold, and they had no idea what cold felt like. They had never experienced anything below 70 degrees. So to be out for 8 days in this new environment where in several places it's going to be below 0 was a big challenge. So we started hiking. And for 6.5 days, we climbed to the summit at 19,341 feet like this, putting one foot in front of the other for hour on hour. And the higher we got, the harder it was to breathe. The first few days were fun and exciting, but by about day 4, we were all breaking down. We all were nauseous, had headaches, sunburns, chapped lips. At one point, Fumo, all of a sudden, just falls to the ground, grabs his ankle, starts wincing in pain. We all run up to him, fearing the worst. And he has rolled his ankle. And we're all worried. But he eventually just shakes it off. He wants to get up and continue. Come to find out, this had actually happened to Fumo many times before, and he had actually forgotten his ankle brace at home. Leave it to a teenage boy, right, to neglect to mention something important that he might need. And then Hassan hadn't been eating very much over the first few days, and he wasn't looking very well. And at one point, we're hiking along, and he just finally leans forward, clutching his stomach. We get up to him, and he just starts crying. I mean, he was in a lot of pain. We get him to calm down, give him a Tums, tell him we're going to get you to lunch. When we get to lunch, we'll sit down, we'll figure out what's going on. Well, we finally get to lunch. We're fearing maybe altitude sickness or something. But hard-boiled eggs happen to come out for lunch, among other things. And Hassan just starts eating all the hard-boiled eggs. And we realize that he's enjoying this, and we start giving him hard-boiled eggs off of our plates. Come to find out, there was no serious stomach issue all along. Hassan is just a picky eater. So we were all struggling. But Kilimanjaro was not meant to be easy. We chose it because it was hard, because it was not a known outcome. Actually, about 50% of people who attempt Kilimanjaro don't reach the top. But if our goal was to just raise awareness about what people with disabilities can do, we could have just taken Fumo, Hassan, and Marceline and showcased what they were already good at. We could have had a race to show how fast Fumo is, or a soccer tournament to show how good at soccer Hassan is, or a math competition to show how good at math Marceline is. But we chose a challenge because when we're tested, we feel empowered, and people notice. Well, summit night tested us all. To hike from the base camp up to the frozen summit and then halfway back down the mountain again was going to take about 19 hours. So we're about 7 hours in. It's middle of the night, 4 a.m., below zero. And we finally get to the top of this crater rim, and we have a minute to rest. And we look over, and Hassan is just frozen, expressionless, shaking. He's got boogers and tears frozen to his face. We rush into action. We get him to sit down, and we just start rubbing his arms and his legs, trying to get blood back in them. Try to get him to sip some hot water. Take out our hand warmers. We're shoving hand warmers in his coat. One guy gives him his coat. At this point, Hassan's crying. I'm crying. It was a mess. But after too long, Hassan finally starts to make eye contact, nod his head, and we ask him, do you want to continue these last 45 minutes? And he nods and gets up and starts trudging along. Well, lucky for him, an ice storm rolls in at this point, and for the last 45 minutes, we're just getting blasted with sleet. I mean, eyes squinting, barely able to see in front of us, just lean forward until we finally reach the summit. We touch the sign, we take a few pictures. We're up there for a grand total of about 9 minutes. And then we head down. And I do mean head down, literally head first. I was told later that Fumo and Hassan were somersaulting down the mountain, just as giddy as can be. Now, what would have happened if Fumo, Hassan, and Marceline weren't given this opportunity? What happens to any of us if we're not challenged or tested? If we go untested, we stop feeling valuable. And if people in our community don't feel valuable, everyone suffers. So, how do we create a community where people feel valued? Our tendency is to let our expectations of people change once they've proven themselves to us, once they've accomplished something. But what if we started with having high expectations for one another, just believing they could do something? We don't all have to go climb Kilimanjaro or go rock climbing or kayaking or public speaking. But if you're unsure if someone can do something, start with the assumption that they can, and then together figure out what supports he or she might need in order to get there. I would steer clear of let me do that for you, and instead ask, how can I help you do that? When it comes to people's abilities, we can't put up divides. We can't let people's perceived utility define their worth. Unfortunately, I've seen in Kenya how deadly that attitude can be. Now, there is risk in having high expectations, sure, because people fail. We all fail all the time. But in my experience, the reward for having high expectations for someone far outweighs the disappointment in getting let down. You may be wondering about Marceline. She didn't reach the top. After a conversation with the guides, we decided that it was going to be too difficult for her to continue. And through tears, she went down the mountain to meet us later. Well, when we got down to the bottom and met Marceline, she gave us that glare. She had not wanted to give up. But another young woman on our team named Liz also got sent back down on summit night. She hadn't reached the top. And when Liz told Marceline that she didn't make it either, Marceline's face lit up. We got a chance to tell her, it's not about succeeding, it's about trying. Well, Fumo, Hassan, and Marceline are local celebrities now. Hundreds of people from their villages nearby came to their school for this big disability awareness parade and ceremony for the 3 climbers. According to available records, Fumo and Hassan are the first local kids with disabilities to summit the mountain. Marceline is seen differently now by her peers. Hassan loves telling everyone how cold it was. And Fumo loves showing pictures of himself to everybody. The community's perspective is changing. Even one of the mountain guides is viewing his 2 daughters who have autism differently now. He's sending them to school instead of hiding them away. And it started with high expectations. I believe the greatest support we can give people in our community, with or without disabilities, is believing that they can do great things, because they can. Thank you.